I'm Carrie Starr, and this is Jared Starr, my husband. We're at Cherokee Valley Bison Ranch. We raise grass-fed bison, and we also have an agritourism venture here where we have teepees that people come and stay here at our farm and learn more about bison.
And all of that happens right here in Thornville, Ohio.
So there's a fellow named Moritz Espy, and he did a presentation at the National Bison Association Winter Conference, and fencing is always like, what kind of fencing do I need? So he said it just depends on how well you sleep at night. So I sleep light, so we have the max kind of fence. Plus, we're kind of in a populated area. We don't want our herd getting out, so we like having these nice, strong fences. And we like high tensile, which is what this fence is called, because it's very giving. So, it stretches. And because we have a lot of trees around our property, it's not if a tree falls on the fence, it's when a tree falls on the fence. Jared just finished cleaning off a tree fall the other day. So it's really nice because unless it falls on a post, which has happened, if a tree falls on it, it mashes it down. He gets the chainsaw, cuts it off, and boing, it pops right back up. It typically does not break the wire. And you just replace a few staples and tighten it back up and you're good to go. So it's easy to repair. I love that aspect of it. Yeah, so that's why we like high tensile fence, but there's other iterations of fence that you can use. You guys have woven wire for some of your fencing. But yeah, this is what we prefer because of all of our trees. So, yeah.
Is it just the top strand that's alongside?
Okay, so we have, the top is hot because if they can get their head over it, they can jump it. So if they put their nose up to it, it's going to get shocked. Now if their butt touches it, they're pretty much unfazed. And then our other strategic placement of wires, which this fence isn't the best example, but we like to have it nose height. So where the adults touch it with their nose and where the calves touch it with their nose. And that's how the other fence is. So that way they get shocked, they learn that the fence hurts, and they stay away from it. Yeah, so that's our fencing.
Let's talk about some of the improvements to the pasture over the years, including watering.
Excuse
Yeah.
me. What, doesn't all that grass being gone, doesn't it mean that they're always over here? They're not afraid of it, or?
This is an area where they like to hang out because of the shade, so they'll come and lay under the tree, and they do beat up certain parts of the pasture.
And we do, when we come over here, you'll see some areas that look smoother a little bit anyway, and round indentations. We'll throw some mineral on the ground, and that's also why they congregate here. So we've got the water source down here, and then we'll throw some mineral out here, so it does get a little bit more traffic in this specific area.
Yeah.
Yep.
So when we built this pasture, and actually that far pasture, we didn't have any water in those pastures. And so you notice there's this little stream here, and then there's another little stream like it on the other side. So these are almost 10-acre pastures. And the reason why it's so long and not divided is because we only had water down at the end. So we were watering out of the stream, which wasn't the best idea, but anyway, lessons you learn along the way. So a couple years ago, I got a grant from FACT, Food Animal Concern Trust. They actually had just started offering grants for bison that year. So I applied for a grant to get water lines. So we've put in water in each pasture. So now we can subdivide these pastures, which is going to make our grazing more efficient.
Are those wells that are being dug, or is that piping underneath the ground?
So we tapped into our house, or the well for our house, and ran the water lines from the house down and then clear across. Kind of see it in the middle of that pasture over there. So we were kind of like having a hard time growing. So we would have animals born and then we would harvest animals, and so we were kind of staying right around that 15 animal mark. We didn't know about programs that were available. We didn't know about financing that was available because we were kind of stubborn and didn't join any organizations or anything like that. So we went to a farmer's market, and we were joining a farmer's market, and so they had a presentation about microloans from the USDA. And so those were like super easy to get, under $50,000 you could get this microloan. So that was the point when we were able to kind of start to grow. Because before that, we were funding everything. So we built everything, we funded everything out of our own pockets. And so when you have limited capital, it's kind of hard to grow your business. So that was like a wonderful thing that happened for us. You know, not that I love debt, but so we'd have calves born and we'd harvest animals. And then, you know, it was really hard to market the meat because of the fear of over-marketing. So then you run out and you can't like supply a customer and things like that, and then they lose interest. And so that was our challenge. So in 2000, so we started getting those loans, and then in 2017 we had the opportunity to buy another herd. And so the guy called actually on my birthday and said, I'm getting out of the bison business. Do you know anybody that might be interested in buying our herd? And I was like, no, I don't know anybody, but I'll keep an eye out. And if we hear of anybody, we'll send them your way. And then Jared's like, hey, we're interested in buying that herd. So we went to the USDA and got a microloan to buy a second herd. And so that's when our business kind of took off. And we decided that we were going to go, you know, at that point we were maybe thinking we would just get rid of the bison because it was fun, but we just weren't gaining any traction. So it was kind of like bison 2.0 for our farm. So we decided to dig in and join all the organizations and get involved in the organizations and start growing our herd. So,
How many bison you have now?
We have 53.
Is that 53 we're looking at there?
Yeah, that includes the calves. They are hard to count because they move around.
They do, and the little ones are hard to see.
Yeah, there's 13 or so calves from this year's crop. You've got last year's yearlings.
Yeah.
And they're hiding in the grasses.
And what year do you begin to harvest them?
2.5 to 3.
2.5.
Yeah.
So the biggest ones we're seeing are around 2.5 or 3?
We've got a mix of mature animals out there. So everything from 2-year-olds up to, how old is Ebony now?
She's 16.
16-year-old cow.
Yes. That's one of the beautiful things about bison is they have a long, productive life. So they can breed up till they're 20 years old or longer.
Wow.
So it's a very good investment. So when we bought out that other herd, then we were at 30-some animals. So what we found was that our pastures were being underutilized. So they were undergrazing. So they were leaving a lot of material in the field. We were getting some weed growth because we weren't getting effective trampling and utilization of the pastures. So then we built more pasture. So we used to make hay in that far pasture over there. That's what we call that pasture because it's the farthest away. We're real creative. So our far pasture had kind of gone, it had trees grown up in it because we had quit making hay. We started buying hay from another farmer who grows all of his hay for us. And so it kind of just got neglected. And so it had some trees growing up in it. It had brush growing up in it. And so we built the pasture around it, and then the bison have done an amazing job of snuffing out those trees that were starting to grow in there. And of course, as they walk across the pasture, they're dropping urine and manure and fertilizing the pastures. And so having a bigger herd has really made an impact on the quality of our grasses.
Yeah, and one of the things that you'll notice right now is that all of the herd is together. So we turned them into this pasture yesterday.
Yeah.
And that's a really good sign that there's good grazing throughout the pasture right now because they're all together. They're mobbing the grass down together. Once the grasses have been picked over, you'll see the herd start to spread out, and there'll be animals over there and animals over there, and they're just looking for more grazing. And essentially that's also a sign for us to say, all right, the pasture's about done, they're about ready to move. Carrie will talk more about that. But one of the things I want to talk about is land, the use of land here, and some of the benefits and some of the cons of having land come into your family. So this is Carrie's family farm. So it's about a 160-acre tract originally. We're farming 50 acres of this. Now the great thing is that when Carrie said, I think I can raise bison, she had the land. So she had that starting spot to say, all right, now let's go figure out how to put up pasture fence. That's one of the great benefits. We didn't need to put the capital out to spend money on new land as well as new bison, new infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. Some of the challenges that come with family land, we're going to notice here because this pasture here is a really good example. You can't see it, but on where the grass starts turning green is the other drainage ditch. So underneath all of this pasture, everywhere on our farm, is clay tile that was put in before Carrie and I were born. Really old tile that is starting to fail. And it's only started in the past couple of years where we've had a lot of issues. So we're getting sinkholes, we're getting runoff, we're getting all kinds of challenges that are, as our herd is growing bigger, our pasture has started to get smaller because of some of these issues. We are currently remedying a lot of those issues. So this spring, I rented a digger and we dug out the ditch all the way up to the cross braces over there, and we're going to finish the rest of it later this summer. And part of that is the utility company came in, they've got a right-of-way, and they took their great big machine, drove across our drainage ditch, and diverted the course of water. And we fought with them and the power company on who is responsible, and they fought us back longer until we put it out of our own pocket and just fixed it. But now we're going to babysit when they come. So that's some of the challenges of actually having good land to graze on, but now it's starting to fail, and we're going to have to reinvest. But Carrie's grandparents, they invested in the land in the first place, and that investment is it's starting to come due. So that's one of the challenges. And then Carrie said that we're going to be dividing the pastures up. So talk a little bit about, you want to talk a bit about that while we're here so they can visualize what's going to be done.
Yeah, so our herd still tends to do a little bit of overgrazing because this pasture is almost 9 acres. And so what happens is they go through and they eat dessert first. And so they eat all the stuff that they like and they leave the other stuff. And then they're in this pasture long enough because it's so big that stuff starts to regrow, and then they go back and they eat it again. And so they end up loving that grass to death. So
you have overgrazing and undergrazing.
Yes, exactly, because our impact isn't good enough. So before we couldn't subdivide this pasture because we didn't have the water available to us. So we got the water in, and you know, something always needs money when you live on a farm. So it was in our plan to subdivide this pasture, and then we were speaking with, Jared called the guy from Soil and Water, and he tipped us off to the fact that there was money available through the Inflation Reduction Act. We've tried to get grants through EQIP for years and just couldn't get qualified. So this Inflation Reduction Act came, and we got the inside scoop that there was money available. So I immediately called our NRCS office, and she'll be here talking here in a little bit at 10:30. So we immediately called the NRCS office and applied for the money. And so we got money to do a cross pasture, a cross fencing in this pasture, and in that far pasture, because that's also about 10 acres. And then we're going to fence out the stream. We got money to do that, and we got money to do 2 stream crossings as well as a heavy use area in our corral, which Jared will be talking about later. So we'll be able to better utilize the grasses. It'll improve our grazing capacity by dividing the pastures. Yes, sir.
So do you have like an end state in mind that how many acres you've got that you want 10 pastures or 8 pastures at a certain acreage?
Yeah, so we would like to have a minimum of 8 pastures because that's going to allow us the proper resting time for each other paddock. And 8 seems to be that magic number according to the experts. I'm not an expert, but
how many acres would that be per pasture?
So our other pastures are 3 to 5 acres, and so that's a good number. These pastures seem to be pretty well utilized. We have some water issues, like Jared mentioned, that we're working out that's caused some different kinds of weeds to grow in our pastures, but we'll be remedying that. But yeah, that 3 to 5 is good for our size of a herd.
And how many days would you leave them on before?
Depends on the grass and the time of year.
Right.
Yeah. So I have a grazing stick, and so I go out and I look at the grazing stick and I'm like, this pasture's ready to graze.
Variable, right.
Yeah.
But we like to leave enough time between to break the parasite cycle and allow the grass to grow back so that we're not overgrazing the pasture.
And that would be
Like 14 to 28 days is ideal.
14 to 28?
Yeah. And the more pastures we get, then that's going to increase that resting time. We wanted to have our tour in June because our pastures would look really nice, but we didn't have rain for almost a month. So our pastures looked like August. It was like, oh, this is my fault because I'm like, oh yeah, the pastures will look great in June.
Can you explain the term break the parasite cycle?
So, because we live in Ohio and it's moist, usually, we have parasite issues. So, bison get parasites in their intestines and then they poop them out in the pasture, and then the parasites have a hatch rate or a certain length of time that they hatch out, and that's 14 to 28 days. So, if we don't bring the host back in that pasture, they can't pick up the parasites again. So that's what you're supposed to do, is avoid that. Now, sometimes we have to move the animals back in that pasture before we've done that, and so we have to have a good parasite management program as well.
Doug's got a question.
When you divide these pastures up, do you have like your water put, like there'll be one water, like a wagon wheel or something?
Yeah, so we've got that huge tank, so that will be where our pasture division is, and so it'll be on both sides of the fence. Yeah, so yeah, we'll just run like a brace over the top of that and then build our fence so that they can water right there.
And the rest of it closed off.
Yep. And this pasture could possibly be divided into 3. So we're going to start with kind of not quite half, and then we can run that, because right now we just have a float in that tank, and so the hydrant's on all the time, and so it just stays full of water. So we could actually have a much smaller tank and it would just stay full all the time. So we could run a hose from there along the pasture, and you know, it wouldn't be very good for the winter time, but for the summer when they're usually grazing these pastures, that would be sufficient, and just put another trough down here between the 2 pastures.
So as you add fence, do you have to add other chargers for hot wire, or is it all charged off of one area? And then as you go, are you putting grounding rods in other areas so that it stays hot?
We have 2 chargers. So we have one that runs that side of the farm, and then we have one over there that runs this side of the farm. And so it's got plenty of juice that it can run.
It's a 30-miler.
Yeah, it can run. And it's solar, which is nice because we don't have an electric source over there. So it runs off the solar, it faces south, and it's it runs everything no problem.
Do you have a fence row problem with the grass or the
weeds
growing up that'll shift?
Yeah, don't walk over on that side of the fence.
What do you guys do, or what do you use?
Oh, that's me and a weed eater.
Okay. And that's what we've done.
So put on a good podcast or some music, and
Yep.
and most of the time we'll frankly, it's Carrie and I that they're doing all the maintenance. I claim the weed eating, so usually we're gonna let it go until the fence tells us, hey, you need to take it down.
Yeah, it's not working.
And
It's not working.
we'll talk a little bit more about other ventures on our farm, but there are certain areas now that we maintain pretty well all the time, and other areas that are more difficult to get to, like anything, you tend to neglect it. From about our fencer down that way right now, that's where we've got issues with the water being diverted out. So we need to fix that, clean up that area, and then it'll be keeping it up rather than trying to keep up with it. But yeah, that's all we do. So we're not using chemicals to burn down the wire, other than the gasoline that powers our weed eater.
Yeah. That was one of my grandma's tenets, I guess, is she never wanted any chemicals used on her farm. So even though my grandma's passed away, since she gifted this land to us and her family, we kind of feel like we need to honor that wish.
What's your winter water situation?
So in our corral, we have a automatic waterer, and so it's frost-free down to, I don't know, minus 40 degrees, I think. And yeah, knock on wood, it hasn't frozen yet.
So in the wintertime, they're just doing that area?
Well, that was the initial plan. So last year we started using a bale unroller, because we noticed that thanks to doing some overgrazing, we had some moss starting to grow in our pastures, and we were getting some bald spots. And so my reading was that using a bale unroller to basically hay bomb all of our pastures would be a great way to rejuvenate those pastures. So basically it unrolls the bale like in reverse action of how it was rolled up and baled to begin with. And so this past winter, we bought that bale unroller, and we hay bombed all 3 of those pastures, and we got like half of this pasture and then some of our far pasture. And so, but that was kind of contingent around the water. We had a really mild winter, so we were able to keep the water going in these pastures, even though we didn't really set it up for that.
Yeah, most of the water line's below the frost line, so the water itself probably wouldn't freeze, but the tanks and the floats. But again, this winter gave us some nice mild weather, so we were able to keep the animals moving, and all throughout the farm we were hay bombing.
Yeah.
So you guys don't do the, as some people, they have the sacrifice pasture, and they put, you guys just keep moving them around.
Well, we still have a sacrifice pasture. You'll see it. It's
Okay.
the one
Yeah.
that's full of weeds and looks like it's been beat to hell.
Yeah.
Because it has. And actually, thanks to our little mini drought, we fed some hay last week to buy some time on these pastures. We put out 6 bales, and normally we unroll, but we just did some bale grazing. And so that pasture got beat up a little bit. You'll look out there and say what a nice pasture it is. But that bought us some time to allow this pasture and that far pasture and our other pastures to grow back up, so that we're not beating up all of our pastures.
During like winter, that kind of stuff, does the type of grass that you have, does it still grow, but it's really slow, or does it growing stop?
I think we still get a little bit of growth in the wintertime, especially when we have these mild temperatures. I think anything above 40 degrees, the grass will start to grow a little bit. But, you know, it's not like in the spring when it's like, woohoo, time to grow.
So you have, during winter in the off seasons, you have to kind of assume nothing's going to grow.
Right.
Okay, got it. That kind of
But
mindset.
like some of the grasses we have out there, you see the tall stuff, that's fescue. So they don't love fescue, and they won't eat it if they don't have to. We went to a conference a few years ago, and they were talking about fescue, and they showed a picture of it under a microscope, and it actually has like little barbs all over it.
Oh, wow.
And so it's not very palatable.
Got it.
And some fescue can have endophytes in it, and that can affect their metabolism and how they, it can make them sick.
Wow.
What they call it, fescue toxicity.
Yeah.
I was going to ask if bison got fescue toxicity.
Now, we haven't seen anything, but they don't eat it. But magically, after you get a freeze, the fescue becomes more palatable to them. So we can kind of stockpile some fescue, and they'll eat that in the winter along with their hay.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So the bale unroller was really awesome because what that did was, so there's like $30 some worth of seeds in every bale. So we rolled that out. It, of course, when they come to eat it, they're pooping and peeing, so they're fertilizing. So they're reseeding, they're fertilizing, and everybody gets to eat at the same time. So when we were doing bale grazing before, which bale grazing is basically you set out a bunch of bales and then they graze off the side of it. The downside to that is you end up with big burned up spots in your pasture because it gets over fertilized, you know, they hang out around it. And then bison have a pecking order. And so if you're not a boss or you're not a baby of a boss, then you don't get like choice feed. So some of our animals, like your yearlings and 2-year-olds that aren't strong enough to fight to get to the bales, they wouldn't necessarily get their choice of hay. So unrolling it allowed everybody to eat at one time. We would roll out 2 bales at a time, and so that worked really well. And then another like major benefit of the bale unroller is we used way less hay. Let's see, the year before we went through 350 bales, and then this past winter we went through 275 with a bigger herd. So that bale unroller, we paid $1,500 for it. It more than paid for itself, like double paid for itself.
So there was a lot of hay before being wasted?
Correct.
Yes.
How would that be?
Well,
Like,
the
how
way,
does that happen?
for a round bale, all the exterior, and we store ours outside, so if it's stored outside, you're going to get some rot and waste on the bottom. Depending on how long it's stored outside, you're going to get some waste around the top and essentially the circumference of the bale. And then when you put it out there, they rip through it with their horns, scatter all that stuff to get to the good stuff in the middle. And then on top of that, once they get that good stuff, they like to just lay down. So then they lay down in it, they start soiling it with their droppings. So the utilization of hay grazing like that was pretty low. And Carrie came up with this idea. I don't know if you heard it from somebody, but another benefit is that when you unroll a bale in an area that really needs some rejuvenation, they're massaging that ground too. So they're stepping in that seed, they're stepping in some of their nutrients, and it's really made a difference in a lot of the areas that were subpar just a season before that.
You did that pretty much 100% last winter?
Yes.
The unrolling?
Yes.
Yes. We just didn't cover all of the ground last year. Yep.
Yeah, we should have started, you know, like everything, you learn as you go. So we should have started like early. Well, so we usually start feeding hay November-ish. So we should have hit these 2 pastures first. But I was like, we need to rotate them around. So we didn't, and these pastures kind of need it the most. And so we ended up just getting the front part. And then it got cold, and so we moved them to this side where we had the water that's good down to, for better, lower temperatures. Because these, we've got hoses on it, and the hoses are your weak link. I ended up freezing the top of that hydrant down there and had to replace that, you know. We're always learning something. So we'll start with these pastures when we start feeding hay this fall, and hopefully get both of these pastures totally hay bombed, and then we can feed on this side when we're done for the remainder of the winter. And then at the end of February, we lock them in that sacrifice pasture and then just unroll hay in that one pasture. And so this year I had fed part of the year before that time period when they're locked on that pasture. I had utilized part of the pasture to unroll. And so next year we won't do that, because then I ended up just rolling hay out over over the same spot several times, and it was a little over impacted. So we'll feed everywhere else and then feed in that pasture last.
Do you supplement more than just hay, like protein tubs, or just straight hay?
Just hay and mineral.
Just hay.
Yep.
And do you find with your mineral how you, I don't know the size of that sacrifice, you know, maybe it's small, that have you had to, do they consume more mineral, or I mean, they're maybe confined and something's out there so they just kind of eat it to eat it, or?
I think in the wintertime they use less mineral because their poop is more firm, so they're not excreting as many minerals. So yeah, I think that our
You don't notice any difference?
No. Actually, they want more mineral when they're out on grass.
And we'll talk a little bit about our pasture when we go into our front pasture, and some of the grazing things that we've noticed about our farm, and actually what the animals use and what they select. And we should probably make our way up there soon.
So let's. Is there more questions? So we have 53 animals right now. We have everything going on. So we've got a breeding herd, and we've got animals that we're going out for meat. We harvest 10 to 12 animals per year for our meat business, which seems to be pretty good. And we are actually getting to the point now, so like in the past we've had to pick up some animals here and there to kind of fill in our meat business, but we're actually to the point now where we're able to produce enough calves to have enough animals to harvest and go back into our breeding herd. The nicest animals, we can be more selective about which animals we're keeping. And we're actually able to grow our herd. So our max herd size, it's cow math. So, it's basically one animal per acre, but that's one animal unit. So I'm a geek and I have a spreadsheet where I have all of our animals and their weights. And so I divide that by the number of animals, and that tells me how many animal units we have. So we basically have about 28 animal units. Even though we've got 53 bison, we have about 28 animal units. So we could probably carry 55 to 60, depending on what size of animals we have out there.
And the acreage that you have for your pastures?
We have about 30 to 32 acres in pasture.
And that includes your sacrifice?
Yeah, because we can graze that in the summertime. It does grow back. Even though it gets abused, it actually has some decent grasses in it. Yeah.
Other questions about the herd while we're here?
How often do you work them? I'm sorry, like
a roundup once a year.
Yeah, once. Okay, got it.
Yep, and then anything else that, like, if we have any animals that need treated throughout the year, we have a dart gun.
Oh, neat.
And if you want to see that, we can probably bring it out later this afternoon, and everybody can look at it. But that was really nice, because before, Jared will tell you about our handling system here in a little bit. But before we had that, we were using the dart gun and to treat animals. So that was really nice.
I'll check out, make our way to the front pasture, talk a little bit more about some of the grasses out there, some of the browse, and then make our way behind.
Yes.
So out front, right along the road, is our living fence now. And it was always one of the worst to maintain because there's also pine trees growing in there, so you had branches growing out. And I kept up the fight for, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 years. And eventually we let Mother Nature have it. And we felt horrible about it because there's no way this front pasture was going to be electrified unless we separated that off. But what we found is that in the springtime, when all of that fresh leaf is on the multiflora, this pasture is, it's starting to come up, and you'll notice, Carrie will tell you about the different species of grasses and forbs out here, but they head for that living fence, and they all just sit there and nibble on the tender leaves, and they break off some of the branches. It's like they're browsing. Yeah. So we haven't determined what's in there yet that they really need, but one of the things that we've done in the past is a lot of multi-species grazing. So Carrie earned a lot of muscle pulling chicken tractors across the pasture. So that's one of the ways that we helped fertilize our pastures, that we ran a lot of different species. We ran pigs around the outside of our pastures, which was great because we love pork. It was horrible because they tear up ground. We drug chicken tractors across this pasture. Every time we moved chickens, the grass grew up. It was really deep green, luscious, emerald-looking grazing. When we pulled the chicken tractors out, the herd went to that first. They ate that down like it was candy. So great fertilizer, a lot of work. And we also ran turkeys. So we did heritage breed livestock, and that included our turkeys. So we ran Narragansett turkeys, usually 75 to 100 or so, and they were free range. So they also roamed the whole farm. They did really good for bugs, keeping pests down, eating through some of the bison leavings. And one of the other things that we noticed is that when we look at pasture, we see weeds, we see the problems. Well, one of the weeds that we had was
Ragweed.
Ragweed. So if you've ever seen ragweed, the tops are just filled with tons and tons and tons of seed. And once they get to that point, they just reseed themselves. So you get more and more ragweed. Well, we saw our turkeys start to eat that. And we learned after reading about it that ragweed is super high in protein. So they were getting really good forage from that and kind of taking care of it. And then we noticed our bison also started eating the tops of that when there was good grazing around. So I guess one of the things that we learn is when you look at your animals, change your perception of what you think is good and bad and see what they do with it first. Because oftentimes we throw money at something and we're gonna fix it. But what we've learned, I guess, and I'm saying this, is that we're cheap. So we don't do things really quickly. We don't throw a lot of money at it because we don't have a lot of money. And if you watch your animals, you're gonna see things that they like that you see as a problem that may not be one in the end. And you can talk more about what the grazing is, what the species are.
Yeah, so we've got some fescue, we've got white clover, red clover, there's dandelions, there's weeds, there's plantain. So all of this stuff they will eat, and you know, you don't typically think of this as a good forage, but it's a tonic. It helps them flush out toxins and things like that. I'm not a grass expert.
This is just what was here, or did you guys through NRCS or anything do any type of reseeding or?
So back in the day when people were making hay on this, they actually seeded this with pasture mix or hay mix, but we have not reseeded other than using the bale unrolling, and you can still kind of see some of the hay down here. So we buy good quality hay which has all of that seeds in it, and so that really helps to reseed our pastures as well. So we've got orchard grass and timothy and all of those things, and a lot of fescue, but that's okay. They might not eat it right now, but in the fall they'll eat it, and it provides, you know, mass that falls off and then ground cover and builds sod. So yeah, any questions? I'm not a pasture expert,
but you have
yeah. So this year, let's see, we're cutting into Emily's time, but yeah. So I consulted with Liz Riffle, who is holistic management certified, because I definitely want to move. We want to move more in that direction, and so I worked with her over the winter to help to develop a grazing plan and help to figure out the cow math and that kind of stuff. So we're definitely moving more in that holistic management direction. One of these days I'd love to not have to mow our pastures, find that magic balance of stocking and consumption. The downside is bison aren't exactly as easy to use your temporary fencing to like do mob grazing like some people do. Some people I know do mob grazing with bison, but ours are buttholes and don't respect that kind of fence. So
Do they respect barbed wire?
yes. I don't know, would that be a good temporary
I don't
fencing?
know. Well, no, I'm actually thinking about pasture right now, but
Yeah.
I was curious.
So we have used temporary fencing with some success, but it has to be really hot. Otherwise they're like, let's play with this. Yeah.
This pasture would be one you would be looking to divide.
Not this one.
No, because this is only about a day pasture, maybe day and a half. They come out here and they go to town and eat this one up. So this is probably about the perfect size of a paddock for bison.
How many acres is this one?
This is about 3.
Yeah.
About 3. So someone here asked how we move the bison. And if you look behind you, the gate we came through, so this is for this pasture. A gate swings one way, one gate swings the other, and we create an alleyway. So that's how they cross here, but how do we get them to move is pretty simple. Once they're done with the pasture, done grazing, they've ate all the dessert and they've ate it again, they're good, or Carrie says it's time to move, it's time to go. So we jingle a chain on the gate. Woo! And bison love to roam. I think I've seen some t-shirts around here about roaming, but they do. They like to roam, they're curious, and we just jingle, we call to the herd. Come on, herd! We've been calling to the herd the same way that we've been since 2008, and they mostly respond to it. Woo! But they like the jingle of a chain. And as soon as you open a gate, most of them are running through. Most of the time. Carrie's had some experiences recently where a calf is sleeping in the tall grass and doesn't realize the herd has left. And then we have some emergencies there. But in general, they all move together. They hear the chain, the head cow takes off, and everyone follows.
Yeah,
So
the cows are the boss.
Yep.